Picture this. The world at the top of the globe is never truly asleep. It is 3 in the morning. The temperature outside is minus 47 degrees Celsius. The wind cuts across the frozen plateau at 90 kilometers per hour, turning every exposed surface into a blade. There is no sun. There hasn't been a sun for 63 days. And somewhere beneath this howling darkness, buried inside a reinforced concrete structure built into the permafrost, a Russian radar operator leans forward in his chair. His screen has just lit up. 2 contacts, fast movers, heading southeast across the Barents Sea at altitude Angels 25. He reaches for his secure line. Within 90 seconds, a pair of MiG-31BM interceptors are scrambling from Rogachevo Air Base on Novaya Zemlya, afterburners tearing open the Arctic night. The contacts are American, a pair of B-1B Lancers out of RAF Fairford, flying a so-called Bomber Task Force mission along the edge of Russia's Arctic Exclusive Economic Zone. They will not cross the line. They never do, but they are closer tonight than they were last month, and last month they were closer than the month before. This is not a story about a future war. This is a story about a confrontation that is already happening right now, in a place most people will never see, over resources most people don't yet understand. Between military forces that are growing more aggressive with every passing quarter, the Arctic is no longer a frozen wasteland at the top of the world. It is becoming the most dangerous battlefield on Earth. And Amanda, what I'm about to show you will fundamentally change how you see the next decade of global power. For generations, the Arctic was treated as a strategic afterthought, a frozen buffer zone, a place where nuclear submarines hid beneath the ice cap during the Cold War. Yes, but on the surface, it was considered too remote, too inhospitable, and too expensive to fight over. The old logic was simple. Why would anyone pour billions into a theater where temperatures destroy equipment, where supply lines stretch across thousands of kilometers of nothingness, and where the ice itself makes conventional operations nearly impossible? That logic is dead. It died quietly, over the last 15 years, killed by 2 forces no general can fight: climate change and economics. Between 2000 and 2024, the Arctic lost approximately 40% of its summer sea ice volume, 40%, according to the National Snow and Ice Data Center. The September minimum ice extent is declining at a rate of roughly 13% per decade. Scientists at the University of Colorado now project that the Arctic could see its first ice-free summer before 2040, possibly as early as 2035, and when that ice disappears, something extraordinary happens. Shipping lanes open, resource extraction becomes feasible, and suddenly, a region that contains an estimated 22% of the world's undiscovered oil and natural gas, in partnership with Russian energy giant Novatek on the Yamal Peninsula. Moreover, Chinese survey vessels have been detected conducting seabed mapping operations. The old world, the world where the Arctic was a wall, is gone. The new world, where the Arctic is a highway, a vault, and a battlefield, has already begun. And no nation understood this faster than Russia. While Western defense planners were focused on the Middle East, on counterterrorism, on Afghanistan and Iraq, Moscow was looking north, quietly, methodically, and with a level of strategic commitment that in hindsight is staggering. Since 2014, Russia has reopened, rebuilt, or constructed from scratch over 50 military installations above the Arctic Circle. 50. That number comes not from a tabloid, but from the Center for Strategic and International Studies, CSIS, whose Arctic Infrastructure Tracking Project has documented every single one using commercial satellite imagery. These are not token outposts. Trefoil Base on Alexandra Land, part of the Franz Josef Archipelago, is a self-sustaining military complex designed to operate in complete isolation for up to 18 months. And it is backing that decision with steel, concrete, and thermonuclear-capable delivery systems. But while the world focused on Russia's Arctic buildup, Nagorsskoye, the northernmost military base on the planet, now features a 1,500-meter hardened runway capable of handling MiG-31s, Su-34 fighter bombers, and even Tu-95 Bear strategic bombers. Along the Northern Sea route, Russia has deployed a network of S-300 and S-400 surface-to-air missile batteries, creating an integrated anti-access area denial bubble, what NATO planners call an A2AD zone, stretching from Murmansk to the Bering Strait. This is not posturing. This is a nation that has decided the Arctic is its future. Something far more unsettling was developing on the other side of the continent, something that, frankly, caught Western intelligence communities off guard. China, a country with no Arctic coastline, no Arctic territory, no historical Arctic claim of any kind. And yet, in 2018, Beijing published a white paper formally declaring itself a near-Arctic state. That phrase, near-Arctic state, was dismissed by many analysts at the time as diplomatic absurdity. Norway is an Arctic state. Canada is an Arctic state. China is located at roughly the same latitude as Kansas. But Beijing was not joking. Since that white paper, China has commissioned the Shuilong 2, its first domestically built polar research icebreaker, with a third vessel, reportedly nuclear-powered, currently under construction at Jiangnan Shipyard in Shanghai. According to a 2023 report by the U.S. Department of Defense, China has invested over $90 billion in Arctic-related infrastructure, including ports, fiber optic cables, mining operations in Greenland, and natural gas facilities, in partnership with Russian energy giant Novatek on the Yamal Peninsula. Moreover, Chinese survey vessels have been detected conducting seabed mapping operations in waters between Svalbard and the North Pole, areas of intense strategic interest for submarine warfare, the Pentagon's own Arctic strategy document, updated in July 2024, explicitly identifies China's growing Arctic presence as a strategic concern that challenges the rules-based order in the high north. In plain language, Beijing is not exploring the Arctic. Beijing is infiltrating it, and it is doing so hand-in-hand with Moscow, creating a dual-axis challenge that NATO has never faced in this theater. And this is where the situation becomes truly alarming, because NATO, for all its power, for all its trillion-dollar defense budgets and carrier strike groups, is dangerously behind in the one domain that matters most above the 66th parallel, ice-capable naval power. The United States Coast Guard, which is responsible for American icebreaking operations, currently operates exactly 2 Polar-class icebreakers. 2. The Polar Star, commissioned in 1976, and the Healy, a medium icebreaker launched in 1999. Russia, by contrast, operates over 40 icebreakers, including the Arktika class, the most powerful nuclear icebreakers ever built, each capable of smashing through 3 meters of solid ice at a continuous speed of 2 knots. The Arktika herself was commissioned in 2020, displacing 33,500 tons, powered by 2 RITM-200 nuclear reactors, generating 60 megawatts of thermal power each. A follow-on vessel, the Rossiya, currently under construction, is projected to be even larger. The icebreaker gap is not a talking point. It is a strategic chasm. Without icebreakers, you cannot project naval power into the Arctic. You cannot escort convoys. You cannot resupply forward bases. You cannot, fundamentally, fight. And right now, in the most rapidly militarizing region on Earth, the United States and its allies are bringing a rowboat to an icebreaker war. But the real shock was not the hardware gap. It was what happened beneath the ice, in a series of incidents that most major news outlets never reported. But that sent shockwaves through every submarine command center, from Norfolk to Severomorsk. In September 2023, the United States Navy conducted Exercise ICEX, a biennial operation in which American attack submarines surfaced through the Arctic ice cap to test weapon systems, communications, and under-ice navigation. That year, the exercise was staged from a temporary ice camp approximately 150 nautical miles north of Prudhoe Bay, Alaska. 2 submarines participated, the USS Hartford and the USS Connecticut, one of only 3 ever built, widely considered the most capable hunter-killer submarine in the U.S. fleet. What was not publicly disclosed until months later through a Freedom of Information Act request, filed by the independent defense publication The War Zone, was that during the exercise, a Russian Yasen-M-class submarine, believed to be the Kazan, was detected operating within the exercise area. Not nearby, within it. The Yasen-M is Russia's most advanced nuclear attack submarine. It carries Kalibr cruise missiles with a range exceeding 2,000 kilometers, and Onyx supersonic anti-ship missiles capable of Mach 2.5. Its acoustical signature, according to a leaked Office of Naval Intelligence assessment, is comparable to or quieter than improved Los Angeles-class submarines, meaning it is extraordinarily difficult to detect and track in the thermally complex waters beneath the Arctic ice. The Kazan was not there by accident. It was there to send a message, and the message was received. This is the dimension of Arctic competition that rarely makes headlines, but keeps admirals awake at night. Beneath the polar ice cap lies the most consequential submarine battleground in the world. Massive undersea sensor networks, collectively known as SOSUS, the Sound Surveillance System, were laid across the ocean floor to detect Soviet boat transits. That system worked because Soviet submarines were loud. The new generation of Russian submarines is not loud. The Yasen-M, the Borei A-class ballistic missile submarine, and the upcoming Husky-class 5th-generation attack submarine represent a quantum leap in acoustic stealth. And here's the critical problem. Under the Arctic ice, passive sonar detection ranges collapse. The ice itself generates constant noise, cracking, grinding, shifting, that creates a masking effect. Thermal layers beneath the surface refract and scatter sound waves in unpredictable patterns. A submarine operating under the ice cap is, for all practical purposes, a ghost. Russia knows this. That is why the Borei A-class, which carries 16 Bulava intercontinental ballistic missiles, each armed with up to 10 independently targetable nuclear warheads, conducts its deterrence patrols not in the open ocean, but under the Arctic ice. These boats represent Moscow's second strike capability, the guarantee that even if Russia is hit first in a nuclear exchange, it can still annihilate its enemies. Protecting those submarines and hunting them is not a side mission. It is the central organizing principle of Arctic military strategy for every major power. While the media ignored this silent underwater chess game, NATO was scrambling to respond on the surface. And the response revealed just how badly the alliance had been caught off guard. In 2022, Finland and Sweden formally applied for NATO membership, a direct consequence of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. By 2024, both nations were full members. And that single geopolitical shift changed the Arctic map more dramatically than any weapon system or military base ever could. Before Finnish and Swedish accession, NATO's Arctic frontage was limited. Norway held the northern flank, Canada and the United States bordered the Arctic Ocean, and Denmark maintained sovereignty over Greenland. But there was a gap, a massive gap, across Scandinavia, where two of the most capable small militaries in Europe remained formally neutral. That gap is now closed. Finland, which shares a 1,300-kilometer border with Russia, brings to NATO one of Europe's largest artillery arsenals. Over 700 tubes, a wartime mobilization strength of 280,000 troops, and decades of institutional knowledge on Arctic warfare. The Finnish Defense Forces conduct winter exercises at temperatures below -40. As a matter of routine, Swedish accession adds the Gotland-class submarine, one of the quietest diesel-electric boats in existence, Gripen EF fighter aircraft, and control of the strategically vital island of Gotland in the Baltic Sea. But perhaps most critically, Swedish and Finnish membership gives NATO something it never had before: strategic depth across the entire Scandinavian peninsula. For the first time in history, NATO can plan and execute a cohesive Arctic defense from the North Cape of Norway to the Gulf of Finland without a single neutral gap in the line. Russia's northern fleet, headquartered in Severomorsk on the Kola Peninsula, is now bordered by NATO nations on 3 sides. The strategic implications are enormous, but they believed this new alignment made them secure. They were wrong, and the price of that miscalculation is still being calculated. Because Russia did not respond to NATO's Arctic expansion with diplomacy, it responded with weapons. In January 2025, Russia's Ministry of Defense announced the deployment of the 3M-22 Zircon hypersonic cruise missile aboard Northern Fleet surface combatants, including the frigate Admiral Gorshkov and the heavy nuclear-powered battlecruiser Admiral Nakhimov, which completed a $15 billion modernization refit in late 2024. The Zircon travels at speeds between Mach 8 and Mach 9. At those velocities, a missile launched from the Barents Sea could strike a target in northern Norway in under 4 minutes. 4 minutes. There is currently no operational missile defense system in any NATO inventory capable of reliably intercepting a Mach 9 sea-skimming target. The Aegis combat system, deployed on US and Allied destroyers, was designed to counter subsonic and supersonic threats. Hypersonic glide vehicles and hypersonic cruise missiles operate in a flight regime, the upper atmosphere and near space boundary that existing radar architectures struggle to track continuously. The U.S. Missile Defense Agency has poured over $3 billion into the Glide Phase Interceptor program, but that system is not expected to reach initial operational capability before 2032 at the earliest. Until then, NATO's northern flank faces a threat it can detect but cannot stop. And while the Pentagon spoke of unity and shared Arctic defense, its closest ally was already making a decision that threatened to fracture the entire strategy from within. Greenland, the world's largest island, population 56,000, a self-governing territory of the Kingdom of Denmark, and the single most strategically important piece of land in the entire Arctic. Thule Air Base, now renamed Pituffik Space Base, sits on Greenland's northwest coast at 76 degrees north latitude. It is home to the 12th Space Warning Squadron, operating the AN/FPS-132 upgraded early warning radar, a phased array system that provides ballistic missile warning and space surveillance coverage over the entire polar flight corridor. If Russia or China ever launched an intercontinental ballistic missile over the North Pole toward the continental United States, Pituffik would see it first. The base is, without exaggeration, one of the most important nodes in America's nuclear early warning architecture. In early 2025, political tensions between Washington and Copenhagen over Greenland's future reached levels not seen since the Truman administration's attempt to purchase the island in 1946. Public statements from senior U.S. officials about Greenland's strategic necessity generated a diplomatic firestorm in Denmark, pushed Greenlandic independence sentiment to record highs in local polling, and created an opening that Beijing was only too happy to exploit. Chinese state-owned enterprises had already attempted to secure contracts for rare earth mining and airport construction in Greenland in 2018, efforts that were blocked under U.S. pressure. But the renewed political instability offered a fresh vector, according to a February 2025 analysis by the Royal Danish Defence College. Chinese diplomatic engagement with Greenlandic officials increased by over 300% in the 12 months following the public dispute. The Arctic's most critical western outpost was becoming a fault line rather than a fortress. But this story is not only about nations and their armies. In a moment, I am going to show you how this invisible Arctic war is already reaching into your daily life, hitting your bank account, your energy bills, and the price of every device in your pocket. 1,600 trillion cubic feet of natural gas and 44 billion barrels of natural gas liquids. Those figures come directly from the United States Geological Survey's Circum-Arctic Resource Appraisal. To put that in perspective, 90 billion barrels is roughly equivalent to the entire proven reserves of Russia today. The Kvanefjeld deposit in southern Greenland contains an estimated 11 million tons of rare earth oxides, including neodymium, praseodymium, dysprosium, and terbium, elements that are not optional luxuries but essential components. In everything from smartphone screens to F-35 Lightning II engine turbines to the permanent magnets inside every electric vehicle motor on Earth. Currently, China controls approximately 60% of global rare earth mining and approximately 90% of rare earth processing. That monopoly gives Beijing a chokehold on the 21st century's most critical supply chain. If Western nations could access and develop Greenland's deposits, that chokehold loosens. If they cannot, it tightens, every year, permanently. This is why the scramble for the Arctic is not an abstraction. The phone in your hand, the car in your driveway, the electricity powering your home, all of it is connected, through invisible threads of supply and demand, to the frozen ground above the Arctic Circle. When defense analysts talk about Arctic competition, they are not talking about polar bears and ice caps. They are talking about the foundation of the global economy. And then there is the Northern Sea Route. This is the corridor that changes everything. Traditionally, a container ship traveling from Shanghai to Rotterdam must pass through the Strait of Malacca, cross the Indian Ocean, transit the Suez Canal. Total cargo volume along the corridor reached approximately 36 million tons, up from just 4 million tons in 2014. Moscow's stated target is 150 million tons annually by 2035. If the ice continues to retreat at current rates, that target is not only achievable, it may be conservative. The economic incentive is gravitational. Whoever controls the Northern Sea Route controls the fastest maritime link between the two largest economic zones on Earth, East Asia and Western Europe. Russia currently controls it. China wants access to it. The United States wants to ensure it remains international waters. And all three positions are mutually incompatible. This is not a trade dispute. This is the kind of structural geopolitical collision that has historically led to armed conflict. Moreover, the resource war extends into a domain that few people think about, but that military planners consider absolutely vital: undersea communications infrastructure. Over 97% of intercontinental internet traffic travels through submarine fiber optic cables. In the Arctic, new cable routes are being proposed and laid that would connect Europe to Asia through polar waters, dramatically reducing latency and creating alternative pathways to existing cables that run through choke points like the Suez Canal and the South China Sea. The Far North Fiber Project, a joint venture involving Finland, Japan, and several private entities, proposes a 14,000-kilometer cable running through the Northwest Passage and connecting Europe to Asia. Russia has its own polar cable project, the Arctic Connect initiative. Initially backed by Finnish company Cinia and Russian megaphone operator Megafon, though Western sanctions following the Ukraine invasion have complicated the venture. China, through its Digital Silk Road strategy, has expressed interest in Arctic cable routes as well. Initially backed by Finnish company Cinia and Russian megaphone operator Megafon, though Western sanctions following the Ukraine invasion have complicated the venture. China, through its Digital Silk Road strategy, has expressed interest in Arctic cable routes as well. Control over these cables means control over data flows. And in the 21st century, controlling data is controlling power. A single submarine, equipped with the right tools, could sever an Arctic cable in minutes and disrupt financial markets. The U.S. Army re-established the 11th Airborne Division in Alaska, rebranded as a Arctic Angels formation specifically trained for extreme cold weather combat. Canada announced Operation Nanook-Tuk-Tuk, expanding its annual Arctic sovereignty patrols, and pledging to modernize the North Warning System, the chain of radar stations across the Canadian Arctic that forms part of NORAD's early warning network and has not been substantially upgraded since the 1980s. Denmark increased defense spending for Greenland. NATO is responding. It is not yet leading. So where does this end? There are three paths forward, and history suggests only one of them is likely. The first path is managed de-escalation. Under this scenario. In this scenario, the Arctic effectively splits into two blocks: a NATO-aligned Western Arctic encompassing North America, Greenland, Scandinavia, and the European High North, and a Russo-Chinese Eastern Arctic encompassing the Northern Sea Route, Russia's resource zones, and Chinese-backed infrastructure. The two blocks coexist in a state of armed tension, not unlike the Cold War division of Europe, with occasional flashpoints but no direct conflict. This is arguably the path already being traveled. The third path is total escalation, a miscalculation, a submarine collision under the ice, a confrontation between an icebreaker and a warship near a disputed resource zone, a cyber attack on Arctic early warning radars. Any one of these could trigger a rapid escalation ladder that climbs from the Arctic into the global domain. The Arctic, unlike the South China Sea or the Middle East, is uniquely dangerous because it is where the nuclear arsenals of the United States and Russia physically overlap. Military communications and civilian internet access across entire continents. The Russian Navy is known to operate specialized submarine cable interfacing vessels, including the Yantar, an intelligence-gathering ship. Submarine-launched ballistic missiles on patrol under the ice, bomber flight corridors over the pole, early warning radars pointed at each other across the frozen void. A conventional skirmish in the Arctic carries an inherent risk of nuclear miscalculation that simply does not exist in other theaters. This is not fear-mongering. This is physics and geography. The world has spent the last 2 decades staring at the Middle East, at the Taiwan Strait, at Ukraine. And while it stared, the Arctic transformed. It went from a frozen afterthought to a resource vault worth tens of trillions of dollars, a military frontier bristling with hypersonic missiles and nuclear submarines, and a strategic corridor that could reshape global trade for the next 100 years. Russia has over 50 bases there. China is spending $90 billion to get there. The United States has 2 aging icebreakers and a plan that won't be ready until the next decade. Finland and Sweden have joined NATO and locked the Scandinavian flank, but the alliance is still playing catch-up against adversaries who started running a decade ago. Greenland sits at the center of it all, coveted by Washington, courted by Beijing, and increasingly uncertain of its own future. The Northern Sea route is opening. The ice is vanishing. The rare earth minerals beneath the permafrost are calling to every industrial power on Earth, and beneath the ice cap, in the perpetual darkness of the polar deep, submarines from 3 nations circle each other in a silent, lethal dance that one wrong move could turn into the opening act of the last war anyone ever fights. The Arctic does not forgive mistakes. It does not offer second chances. It simply freezes you in place, forever, as a monument to what happens when empires reach for the same prize at the same time. The top of the world no longer belongs to the ice. It belongs to whoever is willing to fight for it. And Amanda, that fight has already begun.